say you will love me if I have to go.
Hey everybody, this is Dan, and this is week 7 of History 3380. And this week we're going to talk about the railroad in the United States. And so we're going to talk about technology and business. Now, last week we talked about slavery, and we were in the antebellum era, that era prior to the Civil War. And this week we're starting in that same time period, around 1840, 1850. And we're going to read about America on rails. We're going to read about the railroad, which was a huge technological development at the time. Prior to that time, all transportation was canals and horses, and foot, of course. So the railroad represented a revolution in transportation and also a revolution in business because of the railroad's ability to haul goods and services across greater distances faster and for cheaper. So there's one reading this week, and in that reading are a couple of essays, and the most important one is by a historian named Chandler. And Chandler is a well-known business historian, and Chandler asserts in the essay that the modern corporation in the United States began with the railroad. And I think there's something to be said for his theory, and it boils down to this. The railroad required a manager class. In other words, the railroad required several different levels of management, and also it was the type of technology that needed structure and organization. So therefore, Chandler posits that the railroad represented the beginning of the modern corporation because it was the beginning of modern management and coordination. And along the way, it began to form this idea of white collar workers, sort of middle management. So it really started to build out this professional class of workers at the same time. He also mentions the telegraph in his essay, and again, it's the same kind of technology and the same kind of business where it's not all located at a home office, it's spread out, and coordination is needed in these distant areas to make the system run. So it's a good read, and that's the core thought that I want you to take out of the reading this week, is that the modern corporation begins with the railroad. Now, I'm sure you could argue that, and that's fine. This is just one person's view, but I think it makes a lot of sense when you read through it. And if nothing else, we start to understand that in the 1840s, 1850s, a small piece of modern America begins to emerge with transportation and the way that it expanded not only the geographic reach of the country, but also expanded the flow of goods and services, which is a core part of business and the building of business in the U.S. So we went from, again, last week, antebellum era, to this week, again, antebellum with the beginnings of the railroad, but that's going to carry us forward to the time after the Civil War, which ended in 1865. Now, keep in mind as you read about the railroad that the Transcontinental Railroad, wasn't completed until 1869. So what Chandler's talking about is earlier than that, and you'll see a few maps in the reading on how tracks expanded and how many miles of tracks were built in this time period. And you'll notice they're all east of the Mississippi River. So keep that in mind when you're trying to place the time frame, what the country was like at the time, and how the technology affected the country. Now, the other thing I want you to notice in the reading, one part in particular, there's a essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he was an author and philosopher in the 1800s. Some of you are well aware of who he was. But as a literary figure, Emerson writes about money, and money is another kind of blood. And there's a selection from his writing called Wealth in the reading for this week. And the reason I want you to read that is that's really sort of a cultural artifact, if you will, and it shows how business and technology is starting to work its way into the literature of the time. So that's important because that's something that's incorporated into the country's DNA, not only through our economy, through our intellectual law system, but also we start to see this idea of business and capitalism and technology start to emerge in the literature of the day. So business even has a cultural influence, and we can see it beginning with Emerson and writers before him, but we can see it emerging, especially with Emerson's writing on wealth. So you start to see how ingrained business and enterprise and money and the economy is in the culture of the country that emerges in the mid 1800s. So we're going to go ahead and do that reading this week, and next week we're gonna get more into the technology and more into what I call the build out of the modern U.S. when we talk about Carnegie and Rockefeller. The other thing I want to mention to you, just because it's a technological fact that I want you to know, so you can kind of stack these things up. One of the things that Chandler writes about in the essay that you'll be reading this week is the telegraph. And I want you to understand that the telegraph was invented and deployed in the late 1840s, 1848, and that was prior to the notion of modern electricity. And it's the same thing for the telephone. The telephone was invented and introduced in 1876, and that was before we had the light bulb. And I know it's hard for people to grasp that, because you picture telegraph wires alongside the railroad. But when the telegraph came in 1848 and when the phone came in 1876, the incandescent bulb was not yet invented, or at least perfected. And there were no electric grids. There was no central generation of electricity. Those technologies mostly ran off of batteries or small generators, and there was no electrical system, no electrical lights. The notion of getting electricity into your business or your home, it hadn't been thought of yet. That wouldn't come until the 1880s with Edison's first generating plant on Pearl Street in Manhattan. So think about that, because I think many times people think, oh, we had electricity early on, and then we had the telegraph and the telephone. Things don't work in that linear, logical fashion in the world of technology. Sometimes technologies that you think where one drove the other aren't developed that way. So I just want to throw that out there, because in the upcoming week or two we're gonna read about electricity and electrification from my work, and I want you to start to understand how these things all came about. And I think it'll give us a clearer understanding, not only on the technological aspect of this history, but also on the business and organizational aspect of companies that formed to run these utilities, whether it be communications, transportation, or energy, electricity. So that's it for this week. Everyone's doing a great job. Just a side note, there's a lot of different opinions and levels of experience on our discussion board post. Everyone's doing a great job. Everybody's opinion is valid, and the most important thing is that you answer the prompts the best you can, and follow the rubric so you know how I grade. Make sure your grammar is college level, and make sure the content of your post answers the inquiry that's put forth in the prompt of the discussion board, and you'll be good to go. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, please email me or call me or text me. My phone number is 419-345-7220. That's it for this week. I'll see you again soon. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye-bye.